Okay, guys, so we have a decent setup here on EuroGBP that I think is really a great example for me to show you how I work through my checklist within the ASFX systems. Now, this entry I'm going to show you is an A1 entry. We also have the D1 and the D2. Those are the three systems that we teach at ASFX, the three systems that you'll learn if you take the courses, which are still on sale today only. It's the last day of the summer sale. But this breakdown that I would like to give you here on EuroGBP should give you a good idea of how I work through the checklist every single day. And this is a big part of what I think most new traders are lacking. They don't have a checklist of questions to ask themselves before they take a position. So let's look at EuroGBP. Of course, you can read my notes and skip ahead here, but what I'd like to do is walk you through each piece of the notes that I have written. So the first thing that we're always looking at is market sentiment. And you can see that today on EuroGBP, market sentiment is bullish. It started the day here in the buy zone. It's held above that 50 value all morning. The only thing that it did that I don't love is that the RSI went above 70 here, making it overbought. Now, when it's overbought, that does not mean it's going to reverse. More times than not, it actually will continue higher. But sometimes it does come lower after hitting overbought. So it is important to put that on your checklist as a knock. So when we talk about working through the checklist, the first thing that I'm doing is looking at the TDI. Once I have a bullish TDI or a bearish TDI, once I have a perfect market sentiment line, which is the yellow part of this TDI, that puts me in the direction that I want to potentially see this move today. That's the most powerful indicator on the chart. If you're not using a TDI, I highly recommend you try it. And if you want to learn how specifically we use it to identify entry signals, that's taught in the courses. So with that bullish market sentiment line, that's the first thing that I like about this trade. Then what I look to do is confirm if the EMAs are in that same direction. So because market sentiment is in the buy zone, I'm looking to see if the EMAs are long biased. Overall, they are. At the time of this entry here, let me rewind to the A1 entry. This is where the A1 presented. At the time of the entry, the only EMA that could be better is the 200 EMA down here could be above the dark blue 800, but it's not. So what I wrote in my notes, as you can see, is the EMAs are almost perfect, but again, a small knock with the 200 EMA under the 800 EMA. So it could be better. The other thing that we would then work through after we identify, okay, EMAs are in a long trend mostly. TDI is mostly long bias, except the fact that it's overbought. We put a little star there to knock both of those two things. The next thing that we do is we just zoom out and look at yesterday's price action. Yesterday, you can see this thing moved up on that GBP news. When all the GBP pairs moved down, EuroGBP moved higher. If we draw our zone at the high of day here, where the two candles to the left and the two candles to the right are not higher, that would be our resistance zone that we look to trade into today. When I see horizontal levels, I always want to make sure that I identify if there is divergence as well present at that horizontal level. So what I'll do is I'll blow up the TDI and I can see that the RSI from the high yesterday to the high today is actually falling. It's very slight, but it is falling. While price action, as you can see, is actually rising. So that is technically bearish divergence, which is why that's the first knock, first little thing against the trade here that you can see in my notes. The bearish divergence on top cannot be ignored. So now we have good market sentiment. We are overbought, so we knock that. We have bearish divergence in our way, so we knock that. The EMAs could be better, so we knock that. Now that's 3 knocks. To me, that's automatically a C setup. That doesn't mean I won't take the C setup. More often than not, I'm not trading C setups, honestly, guys. But that doesn't mean that I won't. Here's how I figure out if I will. So let's open up another time frame. Let's go to the 1 minute for a second. Let's go to the 1 hour. I check the higher time frames to determine what trend they are in. Now, on the 1 hour today, don't really pay attention. I'm going to just change these EMAs for a second. Don't pay attention to the 50, the 200, or the 800. I'm really just looking at short-term EMAs. Today, price is above the 8. 8 is above the 21. TDI is swapping today, but it is in the buy zone now at the time of the entry idea, and you're off the 8 EMA. So you could justify this as being long biased. So the 1 hour is long biased, which aligns with our trade idea. The 4 hour market sentiment is in the sell zone, but price is above the 8 EMA. In my head, this is indecisive. It's not clear. Is it long biased or short biased? So that's indecisive. Now, this is why we go to the daily. Let's see if that can sway us to the long or to the indecisive side. Here, price action today, because it's bullish, is actually breaking above the 8 and above the 21 as of the entry idea. But again, market sentiment is in the sell zone. So indecisive here. So now if we go back, 1 hour is long biased, 4 hour and daily are not fully long biased. So what I wrote in my notes here, as you can see, higher time frames are not fully long biased. So that's my fourth knock against this setup. To me, the most serious knock is the bearish divergence and the horizontal zone in our way, because it easily could just chill in this zone, maybe move up a little bit, down, up, and then end up coming lower. So that's the first and most serious knock. These other knocks, the EMAs that could be better, the overbought, and the higher time frames not being fully long biased, they are smaller. But because there's three of them, smaller as like less significant is what I mean. They're less significant knocks. Because there's three of them, I can't just ignore them. So we really have to default to calling this a C setup. Now, if you look at the way that the trade has played out, if we turn off the replay mode, it really has had an issue getting above this zone and getting above that divergence line. So to me, it's not a miss. It's not a loss. It's not a win. It's just a lower probability trade setup where the market sentiment line tells us this will probably rise today. However, these other probabilities against us, I think, keep it from being a big mover. At least that's the case so far. It hasn't even made it to 2R yet, just about 1R at most. And it is holding the 8 EMA. The next candle was bullish, which is exactly what you'd want to see with an A1. But now after working through the whole checklist, you can understand just because I get an A1 signal with a good TDI confirmation, it's off the 21 EMA, everything looks good for our back testing. This is what we teach in the beginner course. This is the foundation for the D1 and the D2. Just because I get that signal does not mean I can take the trade. This is why, again, I feel like a lot of new traders struggle. They don't have the questions to work through to determine, is this setup a high probability setup or a low probability setup? Now here, the C setup is winning. It's up almost 1R, like I said, and that's great. If you took the trade, you can make some money, lock your stop, and you're not going to lose anything. That's great. But the question you should ask yourself is, if you had 10 of these trades, would you take all of them? And if so, you should do back testing to prove 6 or 7 or 8 or 4, how many of them are actually going to be winning trades. Because from my back testing, when we have C setups, typically there's more losers than if you were to look at a group of A or B setups. So how do you know which C setups to take? And like I said, you can use the higher time frame like I do, but even with that higher time frame, if it has these knocks against it, these lower probability things on your checklist that could be better, why take the risk, especially on a Friday? It's been a slow week this week, like Dennis said in the chat. We've had a lot of C setups. So to come in on a Friday and now decide that I'm going to take the C setups is a little bit too aggressive in my opinion, because you could have a loser. If this would have been a losing C setup, you would have been like, why did I take a C setup on a Friday? So now after explaining Euro GBP, I'm going to go through the rest of the Forex list. We're going to go into the GBP pairs now, but I hope that that gives you guys a good understanding for how I'm working through the checklist. And even when I see a good A1 or D1, whatever entry signal, A1, D1, or D2, even if it's great, that doesn't mean I'm putting the position on. I've got to work through the rest of the checklist to see if it's a high probability trade. And if you don't have a checklist in your trading, a set of rules that you can follow, click the link in the description, watch some of my other videos, but consider taking the courses, because that will give you everything that you need. How to take the entry, how to manage the trade, how to exit the trade, how much size to put on the trade, and how high of a probability setup is that trade, or is it a low probability setup, and should you avoid it? Now with this on Euro GBP, we'll continue to watch this as the day goes on. We'll see if it makes it up to 2R, or we'll see if it comes back down towards the entry price, back underneath this zone. Because again, until we're out of this zone, if this trade had presented above a horizontal zone and there was nothing above it, like yesterday's high was below it, then I would say, okay, maybe this can run. But the fact that we already showed resistance here yesterday tells me this might not just take off and run. And that's why I passed on this setup today. And like I said, now hopefully you guys understand how I work through the checklist. And if you want to learn how to do it yourself, click the links in the description, and I'm more than happy to get you started with us and get you understanding how to read a chart the right way.